Yeah, I think we can start now. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Oxford Interfaith Forum reading groups on sacred literature in interfaith contexts. This is the first in a series of reading groups devoted to sacred literature, in this case on the topic of revelation, very loosely interpreted. Sacred literature is distinguished from the non-sacred, not really by any criteria of style or literary form, but because of its divine origin, which sets it apart from other literature and makes it more authoritative than any other writings. There's also a body of supplementary literature that is theoretically less sacred, but still has a vital relationship with the sources. In addition to their function relating to faith and life, these texts also expose the genius of their creators. What this series of reading groups is trying to do is to discuss these texts with attention to their literary merit, in addition to their eternal value as sacred texts. This can be within the framework of other literary, even modern texts, as we shall see this evening. How does the form of the sacred text reflect the content? How have these texts been adapted and changed? How has their use been transformed, as we shall see in a subsequent session? How have they been used in different and maybe even secular contexts? We know that the forms of poetry and prose are not incompatible with divine literature. Scripture itself is flexible and contextual. Before I introduce our speaker for this evening, I would like to acknowledge and thank Ronald Nettler, who I can see is here. He's from the Oxford Center for Hebrew and Jewish Studies, for his help in conceiving these reading group sessions. Ron has been an enormous inspiration and support, and also a very good critical eye. I'd also like to thank Teo for allowing me to organize these literary sessions. So thank you both very much. Now it's my great pleasure and real privilege to introduce our first speaker in this series, Dr. Ismail Lala. Dr. Lala is an assistant professor of philosophy at the Gulf University of Science and Technology, GUST, in Kuwait. Prior to his post at GUST, he taught Islamic studies at the University of Oxford, where he completed his postgraduate and doctoral training. Dr. Lala also studied at Harvard University and completed seminary training at Darul Ulum al-Arabiya al-Islamiyya. He holds licenses in Hadith transmission and Hanafi jurisprudence, and has authored numerous books and peer-reviewed articles on diverse topics, from Quranic exegesis to Sufi metaphysics, and from Islamic philosophy to religious medical ethics. He's also on the international editorial board for the Maghreb Review. The title of Dr. Lala's presentation, which is so brilliantly appropriate for the Interfaith Forum, is The Quran and Kafka, The Trial of Jesus and Joseph K. After Dr. Lala's presentation, there will be time for questions and discussion. So Ismail, please, very welcome.
Thank you, Professor Abramson. Hello, everyone. I'd like to begin by thanking the Oxford Interfaith Forum for inviting me to speak today. And just so you are not subjected to the torture of staring at my vacant face for the next hour, I will share my screen and upload the slides that I've prepared. So bear with me. Go. So, right. Are the slides visible to everyone? Yeah.
Right.
Yes. Okay, wonderful. So I can't seem to move the slides from one to the other. Oh, yes, there it is. Okay. So what I would like to talk about is the dual language or complex rhetoricity of the Quran according to Ibn Arabi, and the dual language of Franz Kafka. I will then attempt to delineate the effect this has on the legal perspective of each, and end by analyzing how this actually plays out in a case study, which for Ibn Arabi will be the case of Isa or Jesus in the Quran, and for Kafka will be the case of the man from the country or Josef K in his novel Der Prozess or The Trial. So let me start by briefly introducing the Sufi thinker Muhyiddin ibn Arabi and Franz Kafka to better illuminate why these two seemingly disparate personalities, separated by time and space, should be brought into conversation. Ibn Arabi was born in 1165 in Murcia, Spain. His early life was typical of a boy from an affluent family. He was well educated, married, and worked as a secretary for the governor of Seville. At the age of 20, however, Ibn Arabi was formally initiated into the Sufi mystical path. He traveled extensively in Tunisia, Egypt, Mecca, Anatolia, Iraq, and Syria, and finally settled in Damascus in the year 1223, where he remained till his death in November 1240. He authored hundreds of works, from brief treatises to the multi-volume Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyah, the Meccan Revelations, and is widely regarded as one of the most important Sufi thinkers of all time. The reason for his continued influence is that Ibn Arabi is completely unique in the way he combines the traditional Islamic disciplines of Quranic commentary, tafsir, prophetic traditions, hadith, and jurisprudence, fiqh, with the more rationalistic fields of cosmology, theology, kalam, and philosophy, especially Neoplatonism. Kafka, on the other hand, was born in 1883 and died in 1924 from laryngeal tuberculosis, aged just 40. He was an insurance lawyer and bureaucrat in Prague by day, which was then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and novelist by night. And it was this double life that fostered his dual language, as we shall see. So let me now broach the subject of dual language or complex rhetoricity, and I would like to start with the Quran. The Quran, many scholars assert, operates on different levels. Abu Ali ibn Sina, arguably the greatest philosopher in Islamic thought, delineated a binary principle of Quranic comprehension, a lower rule for the layfolk, hukm al-qawm, and a higher rule for the voracious, hukm al-siddiqin. On the basic level, the Quran used clear language and supplied unambiguous proofs for the existence of God. These were the cosmological and teleological proofs that used the existence and design of the universe to prove the existence of God. However, there was a higher level for the voracious, for whom the Quranic language revealed deeper truths, and it supplied them with ontological proofs for the existence of God, to use Immanuel Kant's tripartite classification. The most influential Aristotelian philosopher in the Islamic tradition and a near contemporary of Ibn Arabi, whom he famously met once, Abu Walid ibn Rushd, went even further. Ibn Rushd regarded the Quran as a predominantly rhetorical text that elicits religious belief in the masses. The reason for this, he asserted, is that the majority of people do not possess the capacity for correct interpretation of the sacred word. Above this multitude, which constitute the vast majority of humanity, are those who have dialectic proficiency. This group have a better understanding of the Quran, but the true meaning eludes them also. It is only those who can glean demonstrative syllogisms from the Quranic text who have true understanding. This, of course, is only the philosophers. Ibn Rushd believed that the masses were simply not equipped to plumb the hidden depths of the Quran. These two seemingly competing realities for Ibn Rushd of the text and its hidden meaning leads Oliver Lehman to infer that Ibn Rushd was a proponent of the doctrine of double truth. Ibn Rushd declares that Quran-derived syllogistic reasoning is the basis of Islamic law, and it is the corrective to inane religious division. Nevertheless, as Quranic language is more elusive in nature, the ultimate arbiter in cases of contradiction between the prima facie meaning of one passage and another in the scripture would always be philosophy. One of the contradicting passages would thus be interpreted allegorically in conformance with Aristotelian philosophy, and the contradiction would be dissolved. In his classification of Quranic language into rhetorical, dialectic, and demonstrative, with only the final yielding true epistemological certainty or yaqeen, and the first being the lowest level of understanding, there are strong influences of the early Muslim philosopher Abu Nasr al-Farabi. Al-Farabi suggested that the Quran simultaneously uses rhetorical language for the masses, jumhur, dialectic language for the theologians, mutakallimun, and demonstrative language for the philosophers. It is only the last of these, of course, that uncover the true hidden meaning of the sacred text. But in its very terms, assert Farabi and Ibn Rushd, the Quran provides guidance for all. So Farabi, Ibn Sina, and Ibn Rushd all speak of Quranic language operating on different levels. The philosophers of higher understanding comprehend the sacred text differently to layfolk. Ibn Arabi agrees that the Quran has different realities, But for him, it is because Quranic language has an outer or zahir meaning and an inner or batin meaning. The outer meaning, as you've probably guessed, is available to anyone, whereas the inner meaning is the sole preserve of the spiritually adept Gnostics or Arifun. The outer zahir meaning and inner batin meaning of the Quran, says Ibn Arabi, are merely different facets of the same truth, each correct alone and also correct as part of the overall truth. If the zahir represents the point of epistemological departure, the batin is its ultimate destination. To be complete, the journey requires both. And if it begins with the intellect, it reaches its zenith with spiritual unveiling or kashf. Eric Winkle writes that Ibn Arabi's appreciation of the zahir and batin of the Quran allows the true depths of the Quran to emerge and reflects the, quote, radical ambiguity of existence, which imbibes antithesis and paradox. It is because each human moment is different and each relationship with God is unique that the language of the Quran needs to minister to all the perpetually changing needs of human beings. Ibn Alman sees the myriad manifestations of this ambiguity in Ibn Arabi's language as an appeal to and an exaltation of the spiritual perplexity that accommodates all interpretations of the scripture, even, quote, the most contradictory and outrageous ones, unquote. Ibn Arabi's entire project can thus legitimately be categorized as a representation of the duality of Quranic hermeneutics. Ibn Arabi explains this duality in the following way. He writes, it is known that when the divine tongues of religions, al-sinat al-shara'i al-ilahiyya, say about God, the exalted, what they do so in a way that conveys the immediate apparent meaning to layfolk, al-umum. As for the adepts, they understand each word in many ways, no matter what language it is expressed in. God is thus manifested zahir in every knowable thing, while he is concealed batin from all comprehension, except for he who says that the cosmos is his form and his essence. So, because God has an outer and inner aspect, a zahir and a batin, which are among his most beautiful names, al-Asma al-Husna, mentioned in the Quran, the language of the Quran reflects this duality. And it is only the spiritual adepts who are able to discard the law of the excluded middle and simultaneously accept the contradictory realities of the divine, as expressed through the duality of the Quran. Ibn Arabi calls these the two religions, ad-dinan. Gershom Scholem explains that the principal problem that Ibn Arabi responds to is whether there can be a linguistic relationship between God and man. He asks, what kind of direct relation can there be between the creator and his creature, between the finite and the infinite? And how can words express an experience for which there is no adequate simile in this finite world of man? Yet, it would be wrong and superficial to conclude that the contradiction implied by the nature of mystical experience betokens an inherent absurdity. It will be wiser to assume that the religious world of the mystic can be expressed in terms applicable to rational knowledge only with the help of paradox. Ibn Arabi makes full use of ostensibly paradoxical language in his quest to express the inexpressible. In other words, it is only because the Quran expresses the fundamentally inexpressible that it uses language that has an outer meaning that is accessible to all and a hidden meaning that is the preserve of the elite. Yet, Ibn Arabi is adamant that every interaction with the Quran is unique, just as every relationship with God is unique. It is for this reason that the ultimate determinant of understanding the Quran and the Quran's inner meaning is not one's intelligence or philosophical training, as it is for Farabi, Ibn Sina, and Ibn Rushd, but the spiritual connection with God and the spiritual unveiling or kashf that results from that. This kashf becomes a means of direct divine communication between God and man. Scholem eloquently elucidates this concept when he says, revelation, for instance, is to the mystic not only a definite historical occurrence, which at a given moment in history puts an end to any further direct relation between mankind and God. With no thought of denying revelation as a fact of history, the mystic still conceives the source of religious knowledge and experience which bursts forth from his own heart as being of equal importance for the conception of religious truth. In other words, instead of the one act of revelation, there is a constant repetition of this act. This new revelation to himself or to his spiritual master, the mystic tries to link up with the sacred texts of the old. Hence, the new interpretation given to the canonical texts and sacred books of the great religions. The Quran, therefore, has a standard zahir or apparent meaning that everyone who reads the Quran can glean. But there is a palpitating inner or batin meaning that is unique to every spiritually enlightened reader. It is this inner batin meaning that provides the commentary to the outer zahir meaning of the Quran and acts as a form of continuing revelation by which God guides and directly interacts with his servants. Now, the idea of continued divine interpretation of scripture is nothing new. Indeed, Harry Wolfson traces it all the way back to Philo, who maintained that the inner meaning of scripture, what he termed the unwritten law, could not be attained without divine aid. Philo thus advocated a new kind of revelation, a progressive revelation, and believed that the divine inspiration and the work of the Holy Spirit continued to provide true knowledge about God. But what is unique about Ibn Arabi is that this divine interpretation of the Quran is embedded in the outer letter of the Quran itself. The inner batin interpretation, therefore, is nothing more than a legitimate interpretation that is already present and which divine unveiling, as the term suggests, simply uncovers for the Gnostics or the Arifun. So far, I've spoken a lot about the linguistic duality of the Quran according to Ibn Arabi. I would now like to bring Kafka back into this and explain why I feel Kafka shares much in common with Ibn Arabi. Clayton Kolb suggests that the complexity one finds in the works of Kafka are symptomatic of, quote, an attempt to understand a particular discourse as fully as possible, as if one was certain that all its elements were saturated with meaning, unquote. So, just as Ibn Arabi regards every letter of the Quran as saturated with meaning, Kafka regards every discourse as saturated with meaning. The result of this is that Kafka interprets discourse that looks like one thing, but might well be another, according to Kolb. Indeed, in the trial, their process, Josef meets a priest who tells him that the right perception of any matter and a misunderstanding of the same matter do not wholly exclude each other. Richtiges Auffassen einer Sache und Missverstehen die gleichen Sache schließen einander nicht vollständig aus. Ibn Arabi too, asserts Winkel, interprets the Quranic text that looks one way but is another. The only difference is that whereas Kafka's rhetoricity allows for two incompatible, mutually destructive points of view, in the opinion of Paul de Man, Ibn Arabi's two religions, his dinan, are mutually corroborative. Yet both Ibn Arabi and Kafka propose this double meaning as the surest way to articulate the ambiguity of human existence and the interaction of humans with God. Michael Wood calls these Kafka's double thoughts that invite us to question the mundane experiences of our lives and permit the possibility that things may be the opposite of what they appear. What are Kafka's double thoughts are Ibn Arabi's two religions. But as I mentioned, Kafka's secondary thought eliminates the primary through contradiction, whereas Ibn Arabi's inner batin religion and meaning corroborates the outer zahir through the same process of contradiction. This is precisely why Ibn Arabi reserves the deeper religion for the spiritually elite, because they are unencumbered by the contradictions that inevitably arise from the linguistic interaction of the finite with the infinite, from the human with the divine. And it is only spiritual unveiling or kashf that allows this operation to occur. For Kafka, however, this double thought is a corollary of his double life as an insurance lawyer by day and a novelist by night, according to Reza Banakar. Banakar asserts that it is only because Kafka was forced to work as an insurance lawyer, what Kafka famously described as feeding on intellectual sawdust that had been chewed up by thousands of mouths before during the day, whilst his true calling, or what was truly compatible with his, quote, self-absorption and vanity, was writing. that he was able to employ double thought. Kafka's double life presents itself as double thought in his works. Ibn Arabi, too, to the casual observer, had a double life. His punctilious observance of religious ordinances and his acceptance of the literal word of the Quran to delineate legal rulings made many think that he was of the literalistic Zahiri school of jurisprudence, a charge Ibn Arabi himself denied. Yet beyond this legal literalism and outer Zahir facet of the Quranic text is the batin, inner aspect that, as Winkle points out, permits law as a lived experience and evolves and changes with each person and in each moment. I would now like to explore this double thought and dual level appreciation of the Quran and how it plays out in the legalistic works of Kafka and in the legal thought of Ibn Arabi. And I will take the case of the man from the country in Kafka's death process, the trial, and the case of Isa or Jesus for Ibn Arabi. It is best to familiarize ourselves with both cases. The centerpiece of Kafka's The Trial is the parable before the law, for them Gazettes. A man tries to gain entrance to the law, but is impeded by a doorkeeper who tells him that it is possible to gain admittance, but not now. Es ist möglich, jetzt aber nicht. The man considers his options and decides to wait outside the gate until life slowly ebbs from his feeble body, at which point it occurs to him to ask why, despite everyone seeking the law, no one else has tried to gain entry. The doorkeeper replies that it was because this door was meant only for you. I am now going to shut it. Dieser Eingang war nur für dich bestimmt. Ich gehe jetzt und schließe ihn. This parable is an anecdotal macrocosm of the case initiated against Kafka's central protagonist in the trial, Josef. The case of Isa that I would like to compare this with occurs at the end of chapter 5 in the Quran. I'll provide a personal translation of the original Arabic. The Quran states, "And when God said, O Isa, son of Mary, did you say to people, take me and my mother as gods besides Allah? He said, be you praised. Subhanat, it is not for me to say what I have no right to say. Had I said it, you would have known it. You know what is in myself, nafs, and I do not know what is in yours. You are surely know of the unseen. I did not say to them anything but what you commanded me to say, worship Allah, my Lord and your Lord. And I was a witness of them whilst I was amongst them. So when you caused me to pass away, you were the watcher over them. And you are a witness over everything. If you punish them, they are your servants. And if you forgive them, you are the mighty, the wise." Allah said, "This is a day on which the truthful shall benefit from their truth. For them are gardens under which rivers flow, where they shall abide forever. Allah is pleased with them, and they with him. That is the great victory." Even though ostensibly the case of Isa seems very different to the case of the man from the country, upon closer inspection, there are remarkable parallels between the two. Both men come into conversation with the higher authority, but while the man from the country is found wanting, Isa is not. I want to look further into the reasons for this and what this tells us about the complex rhetoricity of Kafka and the Quran and the consequent legal ramifications in each case. It is telling that Kafka uses the term Gazettes for law and not Recht. The former is used 7 times through the course of the short parable, excluding the title. The latter, not even once. The selection, as so much with Kafka, is a considered one. While Recht refers more to rights, Rechte of a person, moral rights, moralische Rechte in general, or the legal system, Rechtssystem, or institution, Rechtsinstitution, or even customary law, Gewohnheitsrecht. Gazettes is defined as, quote, a collection of generally binding legal norms issued in a formal procedure by the authorized state body, the legislator, unquote. It is thus reserved for statutory law, a general legal ordinance that is applied to a particular case. Yet statutory law involves the application of the general to the particular. It is a general law reflected through the prism of individual action, resulting in the responsibility the individual must accept. Josef K's case is just that, his case. The man from the country fails to enter his door, as the doorkeeper brutally informs him. Kafka, by deploying the term Gazettes, not to the general formally instituted law, but also to the law experienced by the individual, by Josef K himself. This highly subjectivized experience of general law brings Josef K and the man from the country in close conversation with Kierkegaard, for whom the individual application of the law is, quote, higher than the universal. In the case of the man from the country and Josef K, Kafka wishes to expose the tension between the wider society and the individual, in the same way as Ibn Arabi exposes the universally applied dhahir, outer ordinances of the Quran, and their personalized batin or inner meaning. Banneker observes that according to Ferdinand Tönnies, who died in 1936, modernity forced society to go from one that held individual experience at its core, Gemeinschaft, to one that privileged industrialized urban living, or Gesellschaft. It is the tension between Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft that Kafka reveals in the case of Josef K. Clinton Gardner also sees the malady of modernity as one in which the rights of the individual compete with and are often in conflict with the values of the community. Whereas Aristotelian political philosophy assumed harmony between these parties, pluralism in modern societies present in the increasingly divergent interests of the individual and the community. Alistair MacIntyre believes that this leads to a double morality in which liberal individualism and communal claims stand in opposition. Theodor Ziolkowski mentions that in the original manuscript of Der Prozess that Kafka crossed out, as Josef K is being taken to be executed, he sees a policeman and thinks, the state is offering me its help. What if I shifted my case over to the jurisdiction of state law? Ziolkowski thus thinks that Kafka is showing us the dichotomy between the dual law of Roman civil law and church canon law that operated court for centuries. The fault lines between universal law and individual application appear when Josef K's guilt is established and fate sealed, not through positive law, but through an ethical form of judgment that lies beyond the scope and jurisdiction of positive law, according to Banneker. It is the encroachment of the sphere of divine law into the sphere of positive law, or even divine natural law reflected through positive law. Ziolkowski notes that the laws with which Josef K is familiar is not the law with a capital L to which he is summoned. It is his unfamiliarity to and rejection of the law with a capital L that condemns him. This ethical judgment is unknown to Josef K because he is operating in the sphere of objective positive law, not realizing that the judgment he will receive is subjectivized. Michael Lowry argues that Kafka promulgates a sort of religion of freedom, religion de la liberté, in which the higher law is the subjective law that circumvents the ostensible authority of the gatekeeper and the court officials. The capricious authority of these individuals is emblematic of a desacralized law that must be flouted to gain entry to the true law. Ibn Arabi, while no antinomian, as I mentioned, he was even accused of being a hyper-literalist when it came to the law, encourages his followers to dig deep and find the inner meaning of each act of worship. He rejects religious formalism that is devoid of meaning. The difference between Ibn Arabi and Kafka, however, is that whereas Josef K's execution reveals that these laws contradict each other to the detriment of all those who are caught in between them, Ibn Arabi shows that his dual law, or his two religions, dinan, that of universal application or the outer dhahir law, and the personalized inner batin law of the individual lived experience, are mutually cooperative. It is for this reason that while Josef K is killed and the man from the country dies without gaining entrance to the law, Isa is exonerated. For Kafka, the problem of the individual versus the community results in a double morality that yields double thought, which is captured by complex rhetoricity. For Ibn Arabi, there is only a dual perception of morality, but only one true morality. The outer and inner aspect, the Zahir and the Batin of the Quran, are all due to the infinite manifestations of the beautiful names of God, Al-Asma al-Husna, which are the reason the cosmos exists. In terms redolent of Platonian emanationism, Ibn Arabi writes that the only reason the cosmos exists is because God wanted to see himself in the other. And since the names of God are infinite and not just the 99 mentioned in the Quran, the loci of divine manifestation are likewise infinite. Now, because the entire cosmos is nothing but the physical manifestation and instantiation of the Quran, according to Ibn Arabi, the Zahir displays the universal application of the law, but the Batin reveals individual application of the law, which allows full actualization of all the interpretive possibilities of the microcosmic Quran that is the law, and that is the universe rather. This highly subjectivized law experienced by the individual is found in Kafka's legal writing, which, as Banaka tells us, takes us beyond understanding of law as an instrument of social control and reform and introduces us to law as a form of lived experience. Winkle, as I mentioned earlier, argues that Ibn Arabi's legal thought is also predicated on the lived reality of the individual, in which the law is general, but its application is always personal. This leads to the perpetual ambiguity that emanates from the requirement of general law to be perpetually particularized, or as Winkle puts it, where the desire for standardization and codification is natural or state-induced, the fact remains that the complacency this produces is antithetical to the perpetual receptivity, even confusion, required by the radical ambiguity of existence. This is the duality of the law that results from the tension between the universal and the particular, and it is highlighted by Ibn Arabi in his multi-volume magnum opus, Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyah, or the Meccan Revelations. Providing a mystical exegesis of the Quranic part verse, surely in it is wisdom, ibra, for those of understanding. Inna fi dhalika la'ibratan li'ulil absar. Ibn Arabi writes that true wisdom, ibra, is crossing the wadi, because ibra employs the verbal root ubur to cross over. So they have the same verbal root, and it's crossing over from the apparent Zahir legal imperative to the inner batin wisdom. He therefore advocates the particularization of universal law in order to abide by the outer Zahir and batin inner aspect of the Quran. This means that the law is always changing, as it is for Kafka, and one can never be complacent of their understanding of the law. It is in this paradoxical sense that the ambiguity, haira of unknowing, reveals true knowledge. The never-ending panoply of meanings makes knowing impossible, as it does for Kafka and Jacques Derrida. Derrida writes that before the law explores, quote, the conceptual universality of the law and the singularity and individuality of the man from the country, unquote. As a paradigmatic example of difference, the power of the man from the country illuminates the multiplicity that is the beating core of the law. Derrida, by further disinterring the intrinsic ambiguity of the law through profusion of meanings, continues an operation initiated by Kafka himself in the exegesis of the parable. It is an operation that cannot be completed. Much like the door to the law, the door to interpretations cannot be closed. I would now like to focus further on some specific details that the case of Isa in the Quran and the man from the country have in common, to further justify why the two cases should be compared. The case of Isa has three major issues. First, the interrogator, God, is omniscient and so knows the answer to his question, which means that the question is loaded, but the accusation of self-deification is false as well. So why ask this question? Second, the case refers to the past, yet is set not in the present as all legal cases are, but in the future. Finally, the story, unlike other stories in the Quran, does not have a clear moral. These issues foster an ambiguity that forges a connection to the power of the man from the country. The tense and moral message, as in foreign gazettes before the law, are inextricably intertwined. Being told by a priest, an intermediary between man and a higher authority, in the quote, universal and universalizing tense, the present, according to Thomas Kavanagh, it bears all the hallmarks of a parable. Yet the moral, the key component of a parable, much like in the story of Isa, is unclear. The German term for parable, das Gleichnis, which translates as likeness, demonstrates, quote, the semiotic duplicity inherent in the narrative, in which the chain of signifiers automatically cancels its literal sense, unquote, according to Alwyn Baum. Ibn Arabi makes a similar observation when he writes that the same term in Arabic, mithl, usually translated as likeness or parable, are, quote, not sought for themselves, only for what is known of them of the original for which a likeness was struck, unquote. Josef himself, for whose benefit the parable, if we may call it that, is told, remains decidedly confused about its meaning. In fact, Josef's mental faculties, even though Kafka extols his keen intellect, seem wholly inadequate in processing the circumstances in which he finds himself. This precipitates an epistemological crisis, says Kavanagh. Being 1 degree removed from Josef by virtue of the narrative form, the reader experiences this epistemological crisis yet more keenly. Even after the priest offers an exegesis of the parable, no clear course of action can be deciphered. Indeed, given the grisly fate of Josef in the trial, the parable may function more as prophecy, an oracular tale that Josef does not comprehend until it is too late. The parable is thus told in the present tense as a message for the present about what will happen in the future. This means it bears important parallels with the story of Isa in the Quran, because tense also plays a pivotal role there. The discussion between God and Isa seems to take place in the past. Many exegetes of the Quran, like Imad ibn Kathir, Abu Abdullah al-Qurtubi, among many others, aver that the event depicted in the passage, in fact, will occur on the day of resurrection, on Yawm al-Qiyamah. But it's expressed in the past tense to indicate that it will certainly occur, almost as though it has already happened. So it is a story of the future told in the past with a message for the present. Both before the law and the story of Isa then can be seen as predictions of the future for present day audience. This brings us to the second problem with the story. Oh, sorry about that. An accusation the accuser knows to be false. Another problem with this accusation is that it violates one of the foundational Islamic dicta. The burden of proof is on the plaintiff. Al-bayyinatu al-mudda'i. God accuses Isa but does not substantiate his claim with proof. The 14th and 19th century exegetes Abu Abdullah Nasafi and Muhammad ibn al-Mathari provide an answer for this. In Isa's response to God, had I said it, you would have known it. In kuntu qultuhu faqad alimta. Isa is effectively saying, there is no need for me to offer an excuse for myself, because you know that I did not say it. And had I said it, you would have known it. These exegetes agree that because Isa was never guilty of the crime, it was not his job to exonerate himself, to exculpate himself from guilt, to offer an excuse, i'tidar. The trap of offering an excuse is precisely the one Josef falls into when he identifies so completely with the man from the country. He remains heedless of the policeman's admonishment, and don't make such a fuss about your sense of innocence. The wording itself intimates that despite his innocence of an indictable crime, Josef is already guilty of his handling of the case. It is his feeling of innocence, the full ihre Unschuld, that the policeman bids Josef not to focus on. Josef has already become guilty by doing this. Likewise, the man from the country is culpable when he submits to the doorkeeper's command to wait outside the entrance of the law. He abandons his life and is dead for all practical purposes. According to Herbert Deinard, he becomes one of the thousands of greedy, miles de codiciosos in Jorge Luque Borges' La Biblioteca de Babel, the Library of Babel, who abandoned their sweet native hexagon and threw themselves up the stairs, urged by the vain purpose, el vano proposito, of finding their vindication. Isa does not make this mistake. Ibn Arabi observes that even after being asked a closed question, did you say to people, take me and my mother as gods besides Allah? He did not reply, I did not say I am a god. Whereas Yusuf Khan moves directly to protest his innocence even before he knows the charge against him, because he is so convinced of his innocence. Isa, due to his humility and emphasis on the inner self, or due to polishing himself, to paraphrase Kierkegaard, does not do the same even though he is innocent. Yusuf Khan's mistake is to identify so desperately with the man from the country, thereby ineluctably interweaving his fate with the tragic fate of his anecdotal counterpart. He, in effect, turns the parable from which he could have taken the means of his acquittal into a prophecy. In choosing to vindicate himself, he convicts himself. In choosing to influence the authorities, he ignores the one true authority. Isa confronts similar challenges, but avoids all the pitfalls that condemn the man from the country and Yusuf Khan. Even though he knows he's not guilty of the accusation, he does not move to establish his innocence. He does not wait outside the door. Recognizing that the authority that accuses him is the only authority that can exculpate him, he does not offer excuses, but refers the matter to God's omniscience. We see further parallels between the parable of the man from the country and Isa, because in the sense that the man from the country submits to the doorkeeper's command to wait, he is the one commanded. Yet, as the reason for the doorkeeper's presence, he is also the commander. The man chooses to display his servitude to the doorkeeper when it behoved him to display his servitude to the higher law by entering. In the same way, Isa, as a locus of manifestation of the divine names, since all existent beings are manifestation of God's names, as mentioned earlier, is the questioner. And as the one responding to God, he is the one being questioned. By announcing that he only said what he had been commanded to say by God, and not answering the charge itself with an unequivocal yes or no, Isa circumvents the lower law, the doorkeeper, and reaches the law itself, the Lord. Yusuf Khan ignores the advice to carry on living his life, instead submitting to the case initiated against him to his door and showcasing his servitude to the lower law. It is in this regard also that Yusuf Khan makes a fatal mistake by identifying so completely with the man from the country. This is because the error of the man from the country is hermeneutic. It is an error of inaction in Ivan Turgenev's terms. Yusuf Khan's error, by contrast, is quixotic. It is an error of action. Isa's nuanced response is both hermeneutic and quixotic. Not directly answering a closed question, because he didn't answer a closed question, he is Hamlet. In responding with a detailed explanation of the God-man unity and duality, he is Don Quixote. He is both the man from the country and Yusuf Khan, yet he is neither. If Kafka presents the duality of action and inaction by Yusuf Khan and the man from the country respectively through his complex rhetoricity, then the Quran demonstrates the same duality through its apparent zahir and inner batin meanings according to Ibn Arabi, one in which the apparent zahir legal case of Isa betrays the hidden batin reality of divine law. Thank you. I'm just going to unshare my screen if I can.
Unmute. Yeah.
Minimize this.
just unshare.
Stop share, yes. Here we go.
Stop sharing, yeah. Lovely, thank you. Well, I just get the gallery view. Well, thank you so much, Ismail, for it was so full of content and material that it's difficult to know where to begin. I would like to ask if there is anyone who would like to ask any questions or make any comments. And if you do, please, could you indicate it in some way on the screen, or if you could put it into the chat, and we could start the discussion. Is there nobody yet? I think we all have so much to digest and so much to think about. I would like to just, if I have understood this correctly, I would just like to ask whether you mentioned that, let's see if I can find it, the ambiguity that you were talking about, this ambiguity, the ambiguity of interpretation, is that always prophetic? Does that always indicate some form of prophecy?
For Ibn Arabi, yes. So for Ibn Arabi, this is the whole purpose of this idea of kashf, which is this, what Gershom Scholem talks about, this idea of a continued revelation that the chosen elite are constantly being inspired by God, and this provides the correct exegesis throughout time. And what Ibn Arabi does is he says that, you know, this is why he categorizes himself as the Khatim al-Awliya, right, the seal of the saints, in the same way as as Muhammad was the seal of the prophets, the Khatim al-Anbiya. Right? So he's saying that there's a difference between prophecy, formal prophecy, and sainthood. Whereas prophecy and sainthood, walaya. Whereas prophecy, nubuwa, right, or risala, messengerhood, gives formal law, prescribes formal law, and that has been sealed with Muhammad. The exegesis of the Quran is provided by saints, and there's this continuation of the of saints. And Ibn Arabi says that he is, you know, the seal of saints, the Khatim al-Awliya, because he receives this revelation, this kashf, this spiritual unveiling, which isn't formal revelation. It's not wahi. It's not formal revelation from God, but it is a feeling that they have, the mystics have in their heart, which provides correct exegesis of the Quran. Which is why he actually says that the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, one of his, you know, multi-volume works, his longest work, and Fusus al-Hikam, which are his two most influential works, his two most popular works, weren't written by him at all. He says that these were inspired. You know, he was simply writing them down. That they were given to him by the Prophet. He was inspired by the Prophet, and he was inspired by God. And he simply wrote down. He was just a vessel for writing these things down.
Thank you. Well, that's a sort of definition of what we're talking about this evening. That is the exact definition.
This duality of the Zahir and the Batin is the principal means through which he provides exegesis of the Quran. Now, as you mentioned, you know, this idea of a Sufi interpretation of the Quran isn't anything new, right? The Sufi tradition, you know, dates back all the way to the Prophet, to generations just after the Prophet. You have, you know, Uwais al-Qarni, who was one of the companions of the Prophet, that never met the Prophet, but still had a spiritual connection with him, right? And it was an entirely spiritual connection because he actually never met the Prophet Muhammad, right? And you have these spiritual Sufi interpretations. Ja'far as-Sadiq, for example, is a source, you know, a revered figure in both Sunnism and Shi'ism. He's a source of mystical interpretation of the Quran. So this idea isn't anything new. Where the problem that some, as Ibn Arabi categorizes them, exoteric scholars have, is what is the dividing line between this esoteric interpretation and the outward or apparent, the zahir meaning of the Quran, right? What classifies as a legitimate interpretation, legitimate esoteric or batin interpretation of the Quran, and what has to be discarded as an illegitimate batin interpretation. Now, Ibn Arabi would say that every kashf, every spiritual unveiling provides a legitimate interpretation of the Quran, and the hallmark of this interpretation is that it does not contradict the outward letter of the law, even though ostensibly it seems like they're contradictory. When we actually dig deep, we see that the two can be reconciled in this higher understanding of the Sufi, right? And this is actually the same classification that Abu Hamid al-Ghazali also adopts, right? Abu Hamid al-Ghazali also talks about, what is the difference between a batini interpretation of the Quran and the zahir interpretation of the Quran? What is the dividing line between what is acceptable as an esoteric interpretation and what is unacceptable as an esoteric interpretation, right? And here he's launching an attack against the batinis, right? Specifically, he uses this term for the Ismaili Shia, right? Who privilege the esoteric interpretation over the literal letter of the Quran. So what Ghazali says is the dividing line is that the esoteric interpretation should never contradict or efface the outer word of the Quran, even though ostensibly it may seem that way. Now, he says that this is what the Batini do. The Batinis openly say that the Quran is just, it's all allegorical, right? There's a deeper meaning. The outer meaning doesn't really mean anything. Ghazali says, as does Ibn Arabi, that this is a surefire sign that the meaning is illegitimate. As to your question of Kafka, how he uses this. So he also uses, this complex rhetoricity to show the ambiguity of existence. And, Robert Howard actually talks about how the language of Kafka in the process, in the trial, is similar to the language of Jesus, right? And this is another association between the Christian allegory and the story of Jesus, the story of Isa in the Quran, and and what Kafka writes, because there's this ambiguity in the same way that the words of Jesus are saturated with meaning, right? Kafka he emulates the language of Jesus in his work, the process, to show that this is also saturated with meaning. There are lots of meanings palpitating that we need to explore. He's smiling because she's probably far more qualified than me to answer this question. Harry Bloom, talks about how there is no longer any doubt that Kafka was influenced by Jewish mysticism, right? In fact, Jeffrey Brackhart even talks about how the story of the man from the country is inspired by a Jewish midrash story in which Moses had to go through 4 gatekeepers to get the Torah. Yeah. And Kafka himself described his work as a kind of Kabbalah, right? Jewish mysticism, right? That he's basically investigating man's doomed attempt to know an apophatic and a fundamentally apophatic God, a Deus absconditus, right? In my work, I'm not, in this talk, I'm not discounting or disregarding the Jewish influences on Kafka, right? I'm just investigating the Christian influences, the influence of Kierkegaard, for example, right? Kierkegaard was known to influence, Kafka greatly. Kafka, in fact, began reading Das Buches des Richters, which is a German translation of Kierkegaard's diary 1 year before he started writing the process, the trial, right? And, you know, he speaks about Kierkegaard, you know, he says that, oh, we're on the same side of the world and he bears me out like a friend, you know. So he speaks in glowing terms about Kierkegaard and his association with Kierkegaard. And even in the language that he uses, as I mentioned, you know, it's redolent of Jesus' language according to Howard. And you've got this, this allegory of, the parable is interpreted by not a Jewish rabbi, but a Catholic priest, right? And you've got all these formal demonstrations of Christian allegory as well, where the court, plaintiffs kneel before and kiss the hands of the court officials in the same way as Catholics kneel and kiss the ring of the pontiff, right? So Kafka is exploring the Christian allegory as well as the Jewish allegory, the Jewish influences, you know. So I'm not in any way disregarding or negating or minimizing the influence of the Jewish tradition. You know, it is well established that the Jewish tradition had a great influence on Kafka, and he himself confessed to this. But I'm just investigating a different avenue, the Christian allegory.
Well, thank you so much for saying that, because I think that as you said, the Jewish interpretation of Kafka is fairly well established, and that's something that we do know a great deal more about. But what is so refreshing about your presentation this evening is that you presented a point of view that we don't know all that much about, particularly the relationship of the Quran and the Quran text and the double text and the ambiguity of the text, which we don't hear about that often in relation to Kafka. And I think that is extremely valuable and also very, very interesting. And it raises all sorts of questions about interpretation. Kafka is, after all, fiction, and it's a novel, and we're comparing it with a different kind of text altogether. But I still think that the principles can be comparative, they can be compared. And so I'm afraid we have more or less run out of time. So I would just like to say to you, thank you so much. It's been the most enlightening and very interesting presentation. And I speak for everyone and say that I really think it's been quite unique in our experience for this time being anyway. And thank you so much for your presentation and for coming all the way from Kuwait to do this. And really, it's a wonderful start to this series. And I'm sure that we will continue as we began, because our next one is on the 9th of June. It's Professor John Barton, who's happily with us this evening, who's going to speak about the book of Isaiah and the Christian quest for revelation. So it's a marvelous combination of Ismail and John. And I look forward so much to hearing what John has to say. So thank you all very much for coming. And I'd like to wish you a very good evening. And thank you so much once again, Ismail. Please don't go away.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, everybody. Yes, I think we should give Ismail a round of applause.